My name is Kithara Velmont, and I used to think diplomacy was boring. Oh, how wrong I was. How spectacularly, catastrophically wrong. You see, 3 rotations ago I was just another junior protocol officer aboard the Galactic Council's flagship, the Eternal Harmony. My job? Make sure the coffee dispensers worked, and that nobody accidentally triggered an interstellar war by using the wrong fork during state dinners. Simple enough, right? Well, that was before humanity joined our little cosmic club. Let me paint you a picture of what happened on that fateful day when everything went sideways. The Galactic Council had been buzzing with excitement for weeks. Finally, after centuries of careful observation, we were going to formally welcome Earth's dominant species into our peaceful alliance. The humans had passed all our tests. They seemed reasonable, logical, diplomatic. They even brought flowers to their first meeting. Flowers. Who brings flowers to a galactic summit? Ambassador Elena Vasquez was their representative. Tall, graceful, with eyes that sparkled like distant stars and a smile that could melt the ice rings of Polaris 7. She spoke in soft, measured tones about cooperation, mutual benefit, and the importance of peaceful coexistence. The council was absolutely charmed. Even old Zorblat from the Regal Consortium, who hadn't smiled in 2 centuries, seemed to approve. Such delightful beings, wheezed Council Speaker Threnody, his tentacles quivering with pleasure. So civilized, so refined, they will make excellent additions to our peaceful federation. I should have known something was off when I caught Ambassador Vasquez quietly asking our head of security about the station's defensive capabilities. Not in an aggressive way, mind you. Just curious. Like someone mentally cataloguing emergency exits at a party. But who pays attention to details like that when you're busy making sure the ceremonial goblets are properly polished? The trouble started during the 3rd day of negotiations. The hegemony of Scar had sent their usual delegation of pompous, militaristic bullies. These guys were the galactic equivalent of that one neighbor who plays music too loud and parks across your driveway. They'd been causing problems for smaller species for decades, but nobody wanted to confront them directly. Too much paperwork, too much risk of actual conflict. It's better to just file strongly worded complaints and hope they eventually got bored. General Thakex the Brutal, their leader, stood 7 feet tall and had more scars than a gladiator's training dummy. He'd been eyeing the human delegation all week like a predator sizing up prey. During the morning session, he finally made his move. "These soft pink creatures," he growled, his voice like grinding metal, "they think they can sit at the table with real warriors. They have no claws, no fangs, no natural weapons. They are nothing but prey animals playing dress-up." The chamber fell silent. This was exactly the kind of diplomatic incident we'd been trained to handle. Smooth things over, find common ground, maybe suggest a nice cultural exchange program. Ambassador Vasquez, however, just smiled. Not her usual diplomatic smile, but something else entirely. Something that made my scales tingle with unease. "General Thakex," she said, her voice still perfectly polite, "I appreciate your perspective. Perhaps you'd like to join me for a private demonstration of human capabilities." The way she said capabilities made it sound like she was discussing the weather, but something about her tone made half the room lean forward in their seats. General Thakex laughed, a sound like rocks tumbling down a mountain. "A demonstration? What could you possibly show me that would be of interest?" "Oh, I think you'll find it quite educational," she replied, standing gracefully. "Shall we say the cargo bay? In 1 hour?" Now, I should mention that challenging someone to a private meeting in the cargo bay is generally considered either a declaration of romantic interest or a prelude to violence. Given the context, I was pretty sure romance wasn't on the agenda. But surely the humans wouldn't resort to barbarism. They were diplomats, for crying out loud. The hour that followed was torture. Word spread throughout the station like wildfire. Bets were being placed in 12 different currencies. The security team was quietly positioning themselves around the cargo bay. Even the cleaning bot seemed nervous, their sensors twitching anxiously. I found myself in the observation deck overlooking the cargo bay, pressed against the transparent aluminum barrier, with about 50 other spectators. Below us, the vast space had been cleared except for Ambassador Vasquez and General Thakakes, who faced each other across 20 meters of deck plating. Last chance to back down, little human, Thakakes rumbled, flexing claws that could shred tritium. I have killed beings twice your size with my bare hands. Ambassador Vasquez just smiled that strange smile again. How wonderful for you. I'm sure they were very impressed. Then she did something that made my blood run cold. She reached into her diplomatic pouch and pulled out what looked like a small metallic cylinder. Nothing threatening about it, really. Just a simple tool, maybe 6 inches long. "General," she said conversationally, "before we begin I should mention something about human evolution. You see, we didn't develop claws or fangs or natural armor like so many species. Do you know why?" Thakakes snorted. "Because you are weak prey animals." "Because we didn't need them," she replied, and suddenly her voice carried a note of steel that made the entire observation deck go quiet. "We developed something far more dangerous. We developed brains." The cylinder in her hand extended with a soft hiss, revealing a gleaming blade of some unknown metal. Not a sword, not a knife, but something in between. Something that looked like it had been designed by someone who understood exactly how to take apart living beings with maximum efficiency. "This," she said, holding up the weapon, "is a human combat knife. Standard issue for our diplomatic corps. You know, just in case." The silence in the cargo bay was deafening. General Thakakes' eyes had widened to the size of dinner plates. Your diplomats carry weapons." "Oh, this." Ambassador Vasquez examined the blade with casual interest. "This isn't a weapon, General. This is a tool. Would you like to see what an actual human weapon looks like?" Before anyone could respond, she reached behind her back and produced something that made my species' ancestors weep in their graves. It was black, angular, and radiated an aura of pure menace that seemed to fill the entire cargo bay. Even from the observation deck, I could feel my survival instincts screaming at me to run. "This," she said, her voice now carrying the kind of casual authority that made seasoned warriors break out in cold sweats, "is a human sidearm. We call it a pulse pistol. It fires concentrated energy bursts at approximately 30% the speed of light. The impact delivers roughly the same kinetic energy as a small meteor strike." General Thakakes had gone very, very still. The kind of stillness that prey animals adopt when they suddenly realize they're being hunted by something much more dangerous than they initially thought. "Of course." Ambassador Vasquez continued, "We prefer not to use such things. They're so impersonal. Humans, you see, are persistence hunters. We evolved to track our prey across vast distances, wearing them down over time until they simply couldn't run anymore. It's much more satisfying than just shooting something from a distance." She took a step forward, and I swear I could hear the general's breathing quicken. "But you know what the really interesting thing is about human persistence hunting? It's not just physical. We apply the same principles to everything we do. Diplomacy, trade negotiations, conflict resolution. We're very, very patient. We'll pursue our goals for years, decades. even centuries if necessary, and we never, ever give up. It's another step forward. The general was now visibly sweating, which was impressive considering his species had evolved in a desert environment. "So when you call us weak prey animals," she said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "you're making a fundamental mistake. You're assuming that because we don't look dangerous, we aren't dangerous. But the most successful predators in the galaxy have learned one simple truth. The most dangerous prey is the kind that doesn't look like prey at all." She was now close enough to touch the general, who stood frozen like a statue. The weapon in her hand hadn't moved, but somehow it seemed to be pointing directly at his heart. "Now," she said, her diplomatic smile returning, "shall we discuss the terms of your species' immediate withdrawal from the Vega sector? I believe you've been causing some difficulties for our new trading partners there." The general's mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound emerged. Finally, he managed to croak withdrawal. "But we've held those systems for 3 centuries. Ambassador Vasquez corrected gently. Past tense. "You see, General, those systems now fall under human protection. We've established mutual defense agreements with all the local species. Very comprehensive agreements, the kind that come with some rather specific guarantees about what happens to anyone who threatens our friends." The weapon in her hand shifted slightly, and suddenly the general was backing away. "You can't be serious. You just joined the council 3 days ago. Time moves differently for humans, General. We've been planning this conversation for months. Every species in the Vega sector has been in contact with Earth for quite some time now. We've been very busy making friends, establishing trade routes, signing defense pacts. The usual diplomatic things." She paused, tilting her head slightly. "Oh, didn't I mention? The human fleet currently has 47 warships positioned throughout the sector. They're cloaked, of course. We prefer the element of surprise." The general's legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the deck plating with a resounding clang. 47. But your species was listed as having only a dozen ships. 12 ships that we let you see, she corrected. "We found it useful to maintain the illusion of being a minor power while we established our position. Humans are very good at letting others underestimate them. It's one of our favorite strategies." She knelt down beside the fallen general, her voice taking on the tone of a teacher explaining a simple concept to a slow student. "You see, General, the thing about humans is that we're very social creatures. We form bonds, alliances, friendships, and we're extremely protective of our friends, almost irrationally so. Some might say we're quite vindictive when someone threatens the people we care about." The general whimpered. Actually whimpered. This was a being who had conquered 17 star systems and ruled through fear and intimidation for over a century, and he was whimpering. "So here's what's going to happen," Ambassador Vasquez continued, her voice still perfectly pleasant. "You're going to return to your ship, contact your superiors, and explain that the hegemony of Scar is immediately withdrawing from all disputed territories. You're going to compensate every species you've wronged over the past century. And you're going to do it with a smile. Because the alternative is having a very long, very detailed conversation with the human diplomatic corps." She stood up, brushing an imaginary speck of dust from her uniform. "Oh, and General, if we ever have this conversation again, I won't be nearly as polite. Humans have a saying, 'Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, and I'll hunt you to the ends of the galaxy.' We take our sayings very seriously." The general nodded frantically, scrambling to his feet and fleeing toward the exit. As he reached the doors, Ambassador Vasquez called out one final comment. "Have a lovely day, General, And remember, we'll be watching. We're always watching. The doors slid shut behind him with a soft hiss, leaving Ambassador Vasquez alone in the cargo bay. She looked up at the observation deck, where 50 of the galaxy's most experienced diplomats stared down at her in stunned silence. "I hope everyone enjoyed the demonstration," she said brightly. "Now, shall we return to the negotiations? I believe we were discussing trade agreements." And that, my friends, was the moment I realized that humans weren't just another species joining the Galactic Council. They were apex predators who had somehow convinced the entire galaxy that they were harmless diplomats. The scariest part? They were so good at it that even I had believed them right up until the moment Ambassador Vasquez casually mentioned having a fleet of cloaked warships. As we filed out of the observation deck, I couldn't help but wonder what other surprises humanity had in store for us. Something told me that the next few months were going to be very, very interesting. Little did I know that this was just the beginning. The real fun was about to start. The next morning brought what I can only describe as organized pandemonium. Half the galactic delegates were packing their bags, clearly having second thoughts about sharing a space station with humanity's diplomatic corps. The other half were lining up outside the human quarters with gift baskets and friendship treaties, apparently having decided that if you can't beat them, so you might as well join them. I found myself assigned to escort duty, which meant shepherding a parade of nervous alien dignitaries to their meetings with the human delegation. My first client was Minister Quelox from the Andromedan Trade Federation, a being who resembled a cross between a giant seahorse and a very anxious accountant. "Are you quite certain they won't demonstrate anything today?" Quelox asked, his voice quivering like a leaf in a hurricane. "I heard what happened to General Thax. They say he's still hiding in his quarters, muttering about cloaked warships and persistence hunting." "I'm sure the humans will be perfectly civilized," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "They're diplomats, after all." Quelox made a noise that sounded like a deflating balloon. "Yes, well, that's what we thought yesterday, wasn't it?" When we arrived at the human quarters, I was surprised to find Ambassador Vasquez waiting in what appeared to be a perfectly normal diplomatic reception room. No weapons in sight, no ominous music playing in the background. Just comfortable chairs, a table laden with refreshments, and soft lighting that somehow made everyone look slightly more attractive. "Minister Quelox," she exclaimed, rising to greet him with what seemed like genuine warmth. "How wonderful to meet you. I've heard so much about the Andromedan Trade Federation. Your reputation for fair dealing is legendary throughout this sector." Quelox visibly relaxed. "Oh, well, yes, we do pride ourselves on maintaining ethical business practices. No strong-arm tactics, no territorial disputes, just honest commerce. Exactly the kind of partners we're looking for," Vasquez replied, gesturing for him to sit. "Can I offer you some tea? We've brought several varieties from Earth. This particular blend is quite soothing." As she poured the tea, I noticed something interesting. Her movements were precise, economical, almost ritual-like someone performing a ceremony that had been practiced thousands of times. It was oddly hypnotic. "Now then," she said, settling into her chair with fluid grace, "I understand you have some concerns about trade route security in the Centauri corridor." "Well, yes," Quelox admitted, accepting his cup with tentacles that only shook slightly. "The Scar hegemony has been difficult. Their demands for tribute have become quite excessive. We're losing nearly 30% of our profits to their protection racket." "Had been difficult," Vasquez corrected gently. "Past tense. I received word this morning that General Thax has issued a formal withdrawal from all Centauri trade routes." Something about needing to focus on internal matters. Quelox's eye stalks nearly popped out of his head. What? But they've controlled those roots for decades. Change is the only constant in the universe, she replied philosophically. Sometimes it just needs a little encouragement. Now about those trade agreements. What followed was the most masterful display of diplomatic manipulation I'd ever witnessed. Within an hour, Vasquez had not only secured favorable trade terms for Earth, but had somehow convinced Quelox that humanity was doing him a favor by accepting them. The minister left the meeting practically glowing with satisfaction, clutching a preliminary agreement that would make his superiors weep with joy. "How?" I asked as soon as Quelox was out of earshot. "How did you manage that?" Vasquez smiled that enigmatic smile again. "Simple psychology, Cathara. May I call you Cathara? Every species in the galaxy has been bullied by the Scar for so long that they've forgotten what fair dealing looks like. When you remove the threat and offer genuine partnership, they're so grateful they'll give you almost anything. But how can you be sure the Scar won't come back? One demonstration isn't going to change centuries of behavior." "Oh, they won't be coming back," she said with absolute certainty. "Trust me on that." Before I could ask what she meant, my communicator chimed with an incoming message. It was from Admiral Vorthak, the station's security chief, and it was marked urgent. "Cathara," his voice crackled through the speaker, "I need you in the command center immediately. We have a situation." I excused myself and hurried to the command center, where I found Admiral Vorthak staring at a holographic display with an expression of complete bewilderment. The display showed the local star system, with dozens of small indicators scattered throughout the area. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "Those," he said, pointing at the indicators, "are human ships, 47 of them, just like the ambassador said. They appeared on our sensors about an hour ago." "Appeared? Were they cloaked?" "That's just it," Vorthak said, his voice strained. "They weren't cloaked. They were just there. Our sensors couldn't detect them because they weren't where we expected them to be." I frowned. "I don't understand." "Look at their positions," he said, manipulating the display. "They're not in any standard military formation. They're positioned at seemingly random points throughout the system. But watch this." He entered a series of commands, and suddenly the display showed projected course lines from each ship. The lines converged on a single point, and I felt my blood freeze. "They're all aimed at the Scar homeworld," I whispered. "Not just aimed," Vorthak corrected. "Positioned for a synchronized strike. If they all fired at once, their weapons would arrive at the target simultaneously, despite the varying distances. The coordination required for that kind of precision it's beyond anything we've ever seen." "How long have they been there?" "Based on the positioning, months. Maybe longer. They've been sitting there, invisible to our sensors, just waiting." I stared at the display, my mind reeling. But that means they planned this entire confrontation. They knew exactly what would happen with General Tharkex. "It gets worse," Vorthak said grimly. "We've been analyzing the ship configurations. They're not just warships. Some of them are equipped with what appear to be planetary bombardment systems. Others have deep space sensor arrays that could monitor communications across half the galaxy. And these three here?" He highlighted a cluster of ships near the system's edge. "We think they're troop transports." "Troop transports? For what?" "Occupation forces, presumably, in case the Scar decide to be stubborn about their withdrawal." The implications hit me like a sledgehammer. They're not just threatening the Scar. They're prepared to completely conquer them. "And they've been ready to do it for months," Vorthak confirmed. This whole diplomatic summit, it was just humanity announcing their intentions to the galaxy. They've already won the war. We just didn't know there was a war. I left the command center in a daze, my mind struggling to process what I'd learned. The humans hadn't just joined the Galactic Council as junior partners seeking acceptance. They'd arrived as a conquering force, and they'd done it so smoothly that nobody had even noticed until it was too late. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings, each one following the same pattern. Nervous alien diplomats would arrive, expecting to negotiate from a position of strength. Ambassador Vasquez would greet them with warmth and genuine interest. Within hours, they'd leave with agreements that heavily favored Earth, convinced that they'd gotten the better end of the deal. It was like watching a master artist at work. Every gesture, every word, every pause was calculated for maximum effect. She never threatened, never raised her voice, never did anything that could be construed as aggressive. She simply presented humanity as the solution to problems that most species hadn't even realized they had. By evening, I was exhausted and more than a little unsettled. I made my way to the station's observation lounge, hoping to find some quiet time to process everything I'd witnessed. Instead, I found Ambassador Vasquez sitting alone at a table near the viewport, nursing a cup of what smelled like genuine Earth coffee. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, noticing my hesitation. "Aye, sure," I replied, settling into the chair across from her. "Shouldn't you be celebrating? From what I've seen, today was a complete success for humanity." "Success is relative," she said thoughtfully. "We accomplished our immediate goals, yes. But success in diplomacy isn't measured in single victories. It's measured in long-term stability. And you think threatening half the galaxy is going to create stability?" She laughed, a sound that was surprisingly warm and genuine. "Is that what you think we did? Threaten people? Didn't you? Those ships, the weapons, demonstration, the implications about what happens to anyone who opposes you." "Kythara," she said, leaning forward slightly, "let me ask you something. How many species in this galaxy live in fear of the Scar hegemony?" I thought about it. Dozens, maybe hundreds. "And how many of those species have the military strength to challenge them?" "None. That's why they get away with it." "Exactly. So when we remove that threat, are we creating instability or are we restoring it?" I stared at her. "You're saying you did this for altruistic reasons." "I'm saying we did it for practical reasons," she corrected. "Humans are traders by nature. We need stable markets, reliable partners, and predictable trade routes. The Scar were bad for business, so we eliminated them as a factor, by threatening to destroy their entire civilization. By giving them a choice," she said firmly. "They can withdraw peacefully and find other ways to make a living, or they can face the consequences of their actions. The choice is entirely theirs." I shook my head. "But those ships, that level of preparation, you've been planning this for months." "Years, actually," she admitted. "Humans are very good at long-term planning. We've been studying the political situation in this sector since we first made contact with the Council. We identified the primary sources of instability and developed strategies to address them. And if those strategies involve conquest, then we conquer," she said simply. "But that's not our preference. We'd much rather have willing partners than conquered subjects. Partners are more profitable." The casual way she said it sent chills down my spine. "You make it sound like a business decision." "Everything is a business decision, Kythara. It's politics, diplomacy, even war. The only question is whether you're calculating the costs and benefits correctly." I stared out at the stars, trying to wrap my mind around what I was hearing. "So what happens now?" Do you just take over the galaxy? Take over? She seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. Why would we want to do that? Running a galaxy is expensive and complicated. We prefer to let local governments handle their own affairs. But you'll intervene if they don't do what you want. We'll intervene if they threaten stability, she corrected. There's a difference, is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've just made yourselves the ultimate authority in this sector. She considered this for a moment. Perhaps, but consider the alternative. Before today, the Ska were the ultimate authority. They ruled through fear and violence. We rule through mutual benefit and the promise of protection. Which system would you prefer to live under? I had to admit she had a point, but what happens when someone challenges you? When they decide they don't like humanity's version of order? Then we have a conversation, she said, her smile returning, just like the one we had with General Thakex. Most reasonable beings can be made to see our point of view. And if they can't, then we have a different kind of conversation. The implications hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. I found myself thinking about all the species I'd met over the years, all the different approaches to diplomacy and conflict resolution. None of them had ever combined such apparent reasonableness with such underlying ruthlessness. You know, I said finally, when humanity first applied to join the Council, our xenopsychologists spent months analyzing your species. They concluded that humans were basically peaceful, with strong cooperative instincts and a natural tendency toward diplomacy. They weren't wrong, Vasquez replied. We are peaceful, we do cooperate, and we are natural diplomats. But they made one fundamental error in their analysis, which was, they assumed that peaceful means passive, that cooperation means submission, that diplomacy means weakness. She leaned back in her chair, her expression growing thoughtful. Humans learned long ago that the best way to keep the peace is to be prepared for war. The most effective cooperation comes from mutual respect, not mutual fear. And the strongest diplomacy is backed by the credible threat of force. So you're saying everything that happened today was just normal human behavior? Completely normal, she confirmed. This is how we've always operated. We make friends, we build alliances, we create mutually beneficial relationships, and we eliminate threats to those relationships. The galaxy is never going to be the same, I said. No, she agreed. It's going to be better, safer, more prosperous, and much more interesting. As I sat there in the observation lounge, watching the stars and processing everything I'd learned, I realized that Ambassador Vasquez was right about one thing. The galaxy was definitely going to be more interesting. Whether it would be better remained to be seen. But one thing was certain, the age of humanity had begun, and the rest of us were just along for the ride. The scary part was, most of us didn't even realize we'd bought tickets. The humans had won the galaxy not through conquest, but through the simple act of making themselves indispensable. They'd positioned themselves as the solution to problems we didn't even know we had, and they'd done it with such skill that we'd thank them for the privilege. And the most terrifying part of all, they'd made it look easy. As I finally made my way back to my quarters, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just witnessed the most significant moment in galactic history. The day when apex predators stopped pretending to be diplomats and revealed themselves as diplomats who happened to be apex predators. The difference, I was beginning to understand, was everything.